This video is sponsored in part by Bernina. Welcome to Make Thrift Buy, the show where I try and recreate items from the internet for a fraction of the cost. The inspiration for today's episode is this bag from Lazy Oaf, which is a cute little purse-style shoulder bag with a clasp closure, tassels, and a long chain for the strap. Unfortunately, Lazy Oaf has a We Avoid rating on Good On You, a website that helps one find clothing brands that don't exploit humans, animals, or the environment. So, bow, Lazy Oaf, but it does make it a good candidate to recreate for ourselves. Now, I'm not going to be trying to recreate this bag exactly. Instead, I'm going to be putting my own spin on it. But I am going to borrow a lot of elements from the Lazy Oaf bag, so let's get started. First, let's talk materials. So I want this fabric to be the outside of my bag. I fell in love with this made in Japan fabric when I was shopping for my fabric boxes for the last video. And so I came back to Usawaya and I got 20 inches of this fabric for the bag. Next, the lining. This was an end of the roll remnant, so it was super discounted. It's a lightweight cotton and I also got 20 inches of this fabric. This purse frame was something I found at Usawaya as well, which I'll be using for the closure for the top of the bag. This chain for the bag strap has a length of 47 inches or 120 centimeters. I also got some craft glue. I've got this pointy thingy. Google tells me it's called a tailor's awl. I don't know how to pronounce that. It'll come in useful later on, but a cheap wooden skewer would work just as well. And finally, I've got some tassel trim. I got 20 inches of each trim, one sparkly and one that made me think of unicorn colors, and 20 inches of both was more than enough to make 2 bags. You can see why I love Japanese craft stores so much. They had literally the exact things I needed to make this bag, but if you're not blessed with a nearby Usawaya like I am, these things are available from sites like Etsy and eBay. To find something like my bag closure, use the terms purse frame or bag hardware and it'll take you in the right direction. Alright, so first thing I did was to open up the purse frame. It has a paper pattern inside it so that I can cut my fabric to the right size for the frame. This pattern is a quarter of the full pattern and it's intended to be either copied to its full size or placed along 2 folded sides of fabric. Because I want to add tassels to the bottom of the bag, I want to cut out 2 halves of this pattern from my main fabric. So I folded my main outer fabric in half and I placed this edge on the fold, then cut it out. I repeated this and now I have this. This piece will be the front of the bag and this will be the back. Because the fabric is 2-sided, I decided that I would put the white with black flowers on one side and the black with white flowers on the other. I thought it'd make it interesting to have a bag that's different depending on which side is showing. To attach the tassels, first I lined the pastel trim up with this straight bottom edge here and I cut them to the same size as the bottom edge of the bag. Then I flipped the tassel trim up like this, right sides together with the outer bag piece, clipped it into place and sewed it down onto the fabric just using a normal straight stitch. Once that was sewn on, I layered the sparkly silver trim on top, cut it to the same size, and sewed it on like the other one. You can see that I sewed it on what looks like it's upside down, because when the bag is all sewn up and finished, it'll be flipped down like this. Trust me, this makes sense. For now, I flipped it back up, and let's move on to the lining. Now, because I'm not adding tassels to the lining piece, it can be cut out according to the bag's pattern. To cut that out, I folded the lining in half once, then twice, so there's 4 layers of fabric in total, and then I placed the paper pattern so that these dotted edges are aligned along the 2 folded edges of the fabric. Then I cut around this and unfolded, it looks like this. I then folded the lining piece right sides together like this, clipped it in place around the edges, and sewed it together like this, which gave me a pouch with open square corners. The corners are going to be sewed separately to create shape in the purse. So I flipped the lining around so that one of the open corners looked like this, and then I sewed this corner in place with a straight stitch. I repeated that on the other side and that gave me this pouch. So putting the lining pouch aside for the moment, I moved back to the main fabric for the bag. So we've got one side that has tassel trim attached to the bottom and the other side of the bag which doesn't. I placed these 2 pieces right sides together, matching up their edges and corners, and then I clipped them together along the bottom edge first. I sewed along the bottom edge using a straight stitch to attach the 2 pieces. Now we have a fabric piece that looks just like that main pattern and lining from the beginning. I trimmed the seam allowance smaller as there was a lot of fabric layered in this seam now. Then I moved the tassels out of the way, pushing them into the center of the bag so that I don't sew over them in the next steps. With the pieces folded right sides together, I clipped around the edges this time, and then I sewed them together, much like the lining, down these two straight sides here. I then flipped it to its side while holding the open corner, making sure to push the tassels down out of the way while I did so. And then I sewed the corners of the bag together like this. And just a note here, I didn't bother to press open the seam with an iron before sewing it because I felt that it didn't really matter, but you can of course do this if you want to. I then repeated this on the other side for the other corner. With the bag all sewn up, I turned it right ways out, taking care to push out the corners. And here's the two-sided outer of the purse with its tassels attached, ready to have the lining put in. At this point, I remembered that I wanted to add a pocket into the lining, which should have been done back at this step. But I really like to have pockets in my bags, so I decided, even though it was a bit late, I would still add one by just carefully sewing it into place here. To make the pocket, I cut out two identical rectangles of size 5 by 4 inches. I placed them right sides together and then I sewed all the way around the edges with the seam allowance at 3/8 of an inch, leaving a small gap of 2 inches. When that was done, I cut the corners off the seam allowance, then I turned this right sides out through the gap, taking care to poke those corners out, and I pressed it with an iron. Then I sewed the gap closed like this. Now, if I had done this properly, I would have then attached the pocket here before sewing up the lining, but because I didn't do that, I placed the pocket into the lining here, pinned it in place, and sewed it really carefully into place, making sure not to sew through the other side of the lining at the same time. I did it, and now we have a pocket. Back to the bag construction. With the lining inside out and the main fabric bag the right way around, I placed the lining bag inside the main fabric bag like this, matching up the side seams and the top edges. Then I clipped the two together around the top raw edges, and I sewed all the way around the top edge. Okay, now we've got this, it's time to place it into the purse hardware. So I opened up the purse frame and I'm going to attach it one side at a time. With my craft glue, I coated the inside of one side of the frame with glue. The nozzle on my craft glue bottle is really good for this because it makes it easy to get the glue in there, but you could also use a brush or a skewer if you don't have a glue with a nozzle like this. Once I had carefully coated the inside of the front of the frame, I left it for about 1 minute so the glue would become a bit more tacky. Then I started pushing the front raw edge of the bag inside the frame. This is a fiddly process, I'm not gonna lie. I was really careful not to accidentally yank the fabric out because then I'd have to start again. Once it was placed inside and somewhat held by the glue, I flipped it around so that the lining was facing me. I used this pointy tailor's awl to push any fabric on the lining side that was still hanging out inside the frame. Then I got my glue and I carefully put a little bit more along the inside on the side of the lining fabric. Now, the purse frame kit that I got came with this stuff. It's thick paper that's been rolled into a flexible tube, almost like string, but it's made of paper. I don't know what it's called because I don't speak Japanese and I'm not sure if all purse frame kits would come with this, so I wanted to show it in detail. What it does is it helps add some bulk into the top of the frame, which helps keep the fabric in place because the fabric for the bag is thinner than the width of the frame. Basically stops it from falling out. So using the tailor's awl, I carefully pushed this papery stuff into the purse frame on the lining side all the way around the frame. And then I clipped it to the same length as the frame. Once that was done, I let it dry for a couple of hours before repeating these same steps, so the back of the bag and the other side of the purse frame. I then let the whole thing dry for a full 24 hours just to be safe, and then I attached the chain strap to the 2 holes on the purse frame. And with that, I was done. So how did I go? I love my new purse. I've been using it pretty much every day for the past week since I made it, and it's been holding up very well. Ever since I saw this fabric in user wear, I was determined to use it for something, and I still have all of this left of it. So I think I'm gonna try and make myself a reversible tote bag as well. So although I didn't try and copy the Lazy Oaf bag entirely, I think that a bag of this style certainly doesn't need to be bought, especially not from an expensive store with a we avoid rating, and it can easily be made by yourself. This project is actually really good for beginners if you're either new to sewing or bag making. It is a project that won't bamboozle you by getting to flip the bag outside through the gap in the lining like most bag projects do. It's also a super quick project, excluding the drying time. This probably, like the hands-on part, took me about 90 minutes to do. So it would be an ideal item to give as a gift or to sell at markets or on Etsy or things like that, because you spend a relatively low amount of time and materials on it, but the end product looks very profesh. This video is sponsored by this beautiful machine here, the Bernina's B335. So in my last video, I talked at length about the amazing features of this machine. This video, I'm actually gonna show them to you. First, look! Oh, I'm sorry, Bernina, I got too excited. Firstly, this machine is super easy to thread, especially with the help of a self-threading needle at the last step there. Without speeding the footage up, this is how quick it takes me to thread it. It also runs super smoothly. Here I'm sewing a satin lining material, and it just feeds through so easily. Even a finicky fabric like this feels like pure, simple cotton on this machine. It is also really quiet. I have no worries about using it past midnight, even though I share walls with my neighbors, because it is so super quiet compared to other machines I've used. It has an inbuilt alphabet function, so I can attach little handmade tags to the things that I make, saying my name and the year it was made. I started doing this on clothing items that I'm really proud of. I think it'd be really cool if someone found this in a thrift store one day, and they can be like, hey, this is the name of the person who made this in the year. I also put them on presents that I make for people to give them that extra special personalized touch. The B335 also has over 100 decorative stitches, which helps add an individual flair to projects and fabrics. I used some of the stitches to decorate the front of this top that I made and wore for the advertisement I did with Bernina. It's also got this really great sewing table attachment that adds a lot of room to my workspace here while I'm sewing. Well, it's also compact enough that it isn't taking up a lot of space and being an eyesore in this tiny Japanese apartment we're currently living in. And here's a super nerdy feature that I love. When the bobbin runs out, if I have a project currently going on top of the machine, I don't have to pull the project off to change the bobbin, like a lot of top loading bobbins, and I don't have to move the table either. The project can stay in place while I open up the bobbin case, look at the bobbin from through here, wind it, which is really quick on this machine, and put it back in, ready to go. It's also just the most reliable sewing machine I've ever used. Granted, I've only been using it for about 6 months now, but I have not yet had any problems with it, and what I know of Bernina's is that they're used in schools, they're used in hospitals, they are built to be sturdy and to last, but also run really smoothly. If you want to see the video advertisement I made for Bernina, I'll pop a link down below. And thank you to everyone who has been sending me photos of posters of my face at the Bernina stores, or photos they see of me in magazines. It's been a super absurd and really cool experience working with Bernina. My mum is making the Bernina Australia people send her like a life-size poster of my face. I'm not quite sure what she's gonna do with it. I think that she thinks I'm super famous now. It's really sweet though. Thank you so much to Bernina for sponsoring this video. Thank you all so much for watching. Stay crafty, and I'll see you all in my next video. Bye for now. Thank you so much to the 600 Patreon supporters, the superhuman producers, and the small brands who are all a huge reason that I can make these videos available to hundreds of thousands of you for free. If you've learned lots from my videos, or if it's just the kind of stuff you want to see more of in the world, then vote with your dollars and consider supporting me on patreon.com/Annika Victoria as a member, or for a one-off contribution, go to ko-fi.com/Annika Victoria. Your support means the world.